Hey, Samuel.
Hey, Sydney.
How do religious skeptics begin their nightly prayers?
To whom it may concern.
I'm glad you're here on this Sunday. I'm going to get right into the message. I'm going to tell it like it is, as they say. Oh, I heard a hallelujah. Did you think I don't know what the hell is going on? And a lot of strange places. Where in the hell have you been? Hell fire. Hell fire. Hell fire. All right. Okay. There's something else, too.
Hello, and welcome to the Satire Fire. As you might have heard, I'm Sydney.
And I'm Samuel.
And today we're here to start part 2 of our series on Slapstick by Kurt Vonnegut. I hope that noise is really loud and crude and you were like, where am I right now? Why am I listening to this podcast? But I hope you choose to stick around. So today we are in part 2, like I said, and last week we did a summary of the plot of this book. And if you haven't read it, or honestly, if it's been a while since you've read it, I would suggest going back and listening to that just to get an idea what's this book about, so that we can take us into today, where we're going to do an author background and also a bit of a historical context on what was going on in both Kurt Vonnegut's life and in the world at the time that he wrote Slapstick. This is going to be interesting because, you know, Kurt Vonnegut is one of the most well-known satirical authors, and we're going to read a lot of his books. He's got 14 satirical novels, and this is just one of them. So I'm doing my best to not give you too much information right now, but enough.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the most prolific satirical authors. Like, I don't know if I know of any other authors that exclusively wrote satire and came anywhere close to his production.
Yeah, and so we'll see how it goes. I hope you like it. If you don't, if you have suggestions for the format of our future Kurt Vonnegut books, I'm pioneering this one, so I would love your suggestions. But before we do that, we are just gonna chit-chat a little bit about, you know, what we've been reading, what we've been listening to, what we've been watching, what we've been doing. So let's do that. Samuel, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I was going to talk about a book that I read recently that is, at the point that we're recording this, it's already not in the zeitgeist as much as it was probably like 2 months ago when it came out, but it was all the rage 2 months ago. I finally got around to reading Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green, which, if you're not familiar, John Green is a author who got his start writing YA books that were like a little bit more serious, a little bit more depressing, if we're just being honest.
You guys definitely know The Fault in Our Stars. If you don't,
yeah, The Fault in Our Stars.
It's the same question as why don't you know The Hunger Games? Both of those books. Were you living in the world?
Yeah, it was a very popular book, but he and his brother, Hank Green, have
Hank Green.
Since then become YouTube personalities who have delved more into the nonfiction side of things. They have YouTube channels where they talk about science and history and all these different things, and this is John Green using some of that experience to write about something that he's passionate about, which is tuberculosis. For the predominant portion of human history, tuberculosis has been one of, if not the leading cause of death for the majority of humans. Like, it's crazy to hear all of the statistics related to tuberculosis, and this book talks about that history, but it also talks about the modern landscape of tuberculosis, where we in America and other wealthy nations kind of think of tuberculosis as a solved issue, because it is for us. There are a lot of places in the world, specifically in poorer regions, like in Africa, specifically it talks about Sierra Leone, where tuberculosis is a huge issue, and it is remaining a huge issue because essentially pharmaceutical companies refuse to lower the price for any of the medications that would treat tuberculosis. And if it was lowered and we were delivering these medications to these places, tuberculosis is completely treatable, completely curable, so long as they tested for it and caught it at the right time. And so this book is talking a lot about that. I liked it. I didn't love it. I think that if you, either through learning about it independently or through direct experience, are familiar with the issues that are inherent in a for-profit medical system, this book is saying a lot of stuff that you already kind of know, where it's talking about the way in which these companies are making these incredible amounts of profit off of the back of incredible amounts of suffering. And if you're already aware of that, this isn't going to teach you anything new in that regard. You're just going to learn more about tuberculosis as a disease. So, being someone who does know about that system, I didn't get as much out of that half of it as I feel like somebody who's unfamiliar would have gotten out of it. And then I also felt like it didn't go as far as it should have to talk about these issues as systemic, where I think that a lot of times it's using phraseology that suggests that the reason why these areas don't have medication or diagnostic equipment is because we as a society have just chosen not to give it to them. When really it's not we as a society, it's like 3 people. It's like 3 really insanely wealthy people who have just chosen not to do it because it would make them slightly less insanely wealthy. And I wish that it would have taken a more hard-edged stand on that and would have been more blatant in saying, hey, these specific people at these specific companies have blood on their hands, and they're going to continue to have blood on their hands until they make a morally correct decision. But overall, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot about tuberculosis. I would recommend it to people if you're interested in learning more about tuberculosis, or if you're someone who's not as well-versed in the healthcare system that we have both in America and to an extent internationally. I would definitely recommend picking it up to get a better idea of why some people are so incredibly pissed off about it, and rightfully so.
Actually, this is kind of a crazy thing to say, but they're kind of one of the reasons I decided to go into journalism.
Oh.
Which I don't need to talk about this for too long because I don't want to bore everyone on the podcast, but their crash course, like, show on YouTube I always loved as a kid personally. Like, I thought it was really good, and we would watch those in classes and stuff to learn about different topics. But when I was a senior in college, I was kind of panicking about what to do with my life, as seniors in college often do. And I majored in neuroscience, and so I was on like a pre-PhD track, but I decided I didn't really want to do that. And I remember I like went to a career counseling appointment, and we talked about different things, like what do I like about my science classes, and I had a public health minor, so like my public health classes, and what did I like about working in a research lab, things like that. And what was consistent throughout my answers was that I liked the communication aspects of it. And essentially that long path led me to talking about Hank and John Green being science communicators, and how I thought that was such a cool thing to do, but that I didn't think that was really a job. Like, I just felt like they were just lucky to be able to do that. And the career counselor was like, no, you can be a science communicator. Like, that's a job. You can be a science journalist. You can be a health journalist. You can... Anyways, and so when I first made that decision and applied to grad school for journalism, when I would tell people what that was going to look like for me, I'd be like, do you know, like, Hank Green or John Green, like the science communicators? Like them. But, yeah, I love the work they do in science communication. And I haven't read that book, but I've seen all the promo that John has done for it. I follow them both on, like, all their social media, and yeah, so we'll be excited to read it.
But have you yourself been reading anything or engaging in anything that you'd like to talk about?
Yes. I not recently, but kind of recently started reading this nonfiction book. It's a Dave Eggers book, and I haven't read a Dave Eggers book before, but I bought it so many years ago. It was published in like 2018, I think, and I bought it sometime in college, but it is called The Monk of Mokha, and Mokha is a city in Yemen that is kind of the center for coffee production in the country. And it's about this guy named Mokha who set out to revive the art of Yemeni coffee making, like ancient Yemeni coffee, growing, processing, and also to empower Yemeni farmers and fair trade and get them back. Because essentially, like, what you learn in this book is that the origin of coffee is Yemen.
Yeah.
That's where it came from. But Yemen is no longer, well, I haven't finished the book, I will say. I'm like a little over halfway through, so I can't spoil it for you, but it's also true. So, but Yemen was no longer a major player in the grand scheme of like coffee importation and coffee growing. And basically, like, farmers in Yemen had switched to different crops that were more lucrative, because coffee had become very, it's just it's one of the most complicated crops we have, like agricultural products, to prepare, from like planting the bean to the cup of coffee you hold in your hand. It's like such a complex process. Like, I think in the book it says like over 20 hands or more could have touched just that like one cup of coffee you're drinking. And
just
the complexity with which you have to that goes into preparing just even the beans for roasting. So I don't know, it's not a very lucrative business, especially without fair trade. And so he set out to empower Yemeni farmers and like revive Yemeni coffee. And that's the idea. And he himself is Yemeni American, yeah. And it's been really interesting. Honestly, I've learned so much about coffee. I definitely knew some of it, but I've learned things that I didn't know. And it really makes you appreciate when you go into a coffee shop and you pay like $6 for a cup of coffee. You're like, well, it makes sense. So I've really been enjoying it. I would recommend it if you have any interest in coffee, and especially in like learning about the value of like Middle Eastern products and how exploitative like the Western world can be of the Middle East in terms of the products that they provide. That's been interesting and enlightening and also frustrating. So it's just, I'm learning a lot, and it's written in it moves along well, it's engaging, it's kind of narrative nonfiction, and so yeah, I would recommend it. I haven't finished it, but I like it. So
yeah, I haven't read anything of his that was nonfiction, but I read his novel Your Fathers, Where Are They? And The Prophets, Do They Live Forever? And I liked that. I thought that it was interesting. I didn't agree with all of the stances that it was taking. It's kind of talking about the like It's talking about late stage capitalism, and it's talking about the reasons why we are essentially creating a loneliness epidemic among young men, and also devaluing labor and creating a generation that feels like they lack purpose in the world. And I don't know if I agreed with all of his assessments of why those things are issues or what the solutions to those issues might be, but it was really interestingly formatted because the entire thing is dialogue. It's basically transcripts between people talking to one another, and the style of it was really interesting. So I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I'll definitely check out this other book, though, because I really love coffee, so I'd love to learn more about it from his perspective.
Okay. Well, let's get into what we're here for today, which is to talk about Kurt Vonnegut. I would suggest, if you are interested in learning even more about Kurt Vonnegut, there is a website for the Vonnegut Library and Museum. It's a very well done website. I read this brief biography of Kurt Vonnegut on it to prepare for this episode, and there's this really cute picture of him sitting, I think, in his Cape Cod home, in front of his Cape Cod home, surrounded by hydrangeas, and he's got his hand resting on his cheek and his legs crossed, and he looks so cute. And I'm like, okay.
So
this
demure.
Is the man. So demure, yeah. But it also has something I enjoyed, a blog post from an intern in 2017. So apparently at one point you could intern with the Kurt Vonnegut Library and Museum. Don't know if that's still a thing. But it's an article about the best order to read all of Kurt Vonnegut's novels. For this person, as per this person's opinion.
Yeah.
And that was fun. If you're looking to read them all back to back, maybe just take Rachel's suggested order. Slapstick is 7, so if you already started it, sorry.
Thanks for the input, Rachel. We're not gonna follow it, but thanks.
Yeah, I just it was a nice website, so I don't know, I thought I'd mention it.
Yeah.
But yeah, to start, I wanted to read the very beginning of the prologue of this book. So as I mentioned in last week's episode, I was going to skip the prologue and come back to it because the prologue is where Vonnegut is talking about kind of the purpose of this book and telling us a little bit about his life and saying this is loosely autobiographical. It's fiction, but it really relates to my life. And so he starts it with, "This is the closest I will ever come to writing an autobiography. I've called it slapstick because it is grotesque situational poetry, like the slapstick film comedies, especially those of Laurel and Hardy of long ago. It is about what life feels like to me." We said that last week, but he goes on to say the fundamental joke with Laurel and Hardy, it seems to me, was that they did their best with every test. They never failed to bargain in good faith with their destinies and were seemingly adorable and funny on that account. And I really like that, bargain in good faith with their destiny. And I think that maybe we'll talk about this more next week, but it's kind of like what all the characters in this book are doing.
Yeah.
So he also says that another thing that is kind of true for him in terms of discussing his life and reflecting on his life is not discussing love. Like he says, discussing love and discussing life does not seem important, but what does is bargaining in good faith with destiny, and a little less love and a little more common decency. And I just want us to keep that in mind when we're talking about the life of Kurt Vonnegut. And I also want us to keep in mind gross situational poetry. And so reflecting, the absurdity and the unpredictability of life and not taking things too seriously.
Okay, so, I've got it locked and loaded.
Got these things
front of
in.
mind.
Is this clocking to you? Sorry, that's probably problematic. I don't know if you guys have seen that video of Justin Bieber where he was approached by paparazzi and he was pissed that they were approaching him, and he was kind of manic in this video, and he was like, "It's not clocking to you, is it? It's not clocking to you that I'm standing on business," and it's gone viral. I feel bad though because it seems like he's not doing very well. but I keep quoting, it's not clocking to you. Anyways, so Kurt Vonnegut was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, which often comes up in his novels as a symbol for like the quintessential American town. And so in Slapstick, for example, that's Daffodil Town, where all the artificial family members of Wilbur, the main character, live. Daffodil Town. He was born on November 11th in 1922, so he's a Scorpio, for all those that care. And he was born to Kurt Vonnegut Sr., who was at the time like one of the most prominent architects in Indianapolis, and he owned an architectural firm, and there are several buildings. I'm not really up to date on the architecture of Indianapolis, but there's several still standing buildings that are like prominent and attributed to Kurt Vonnegut Sr.'s architectural firm. My cousins are from Indianapolis, though, so they probably know.
Not to be rude to Indianapolis, but being the best architect in Indianapolis in 1922 feels like a pretty low bar to clear. Generally, it doesn't sound like an architecture town to me.
Well, I think the buildings are like well known. It's like still the most notable buildings. But that being said, yeah, I don't know. And then his mother, Edith Lieber Vonnegut, well, she didn't keep her. Lieber is her maiden name, but was the daughter of like one of, if not the wealthiest family in Indianapolis. And that was because they had a very successful brewery, like a beer brewery.
Hell yeah. Is it one that I would have heard of?
It changed names over time. It was originally Lieber and Company, but then it changed to something. Wait, what was it? I didn't write it down.
White Claw.
And then it became White Claw. It was Lieber and Company or City Brewery, and it later merged with two others to form the Indianapolis Brewing Company.
Okay, I'm sure I would have heard of it if I was from Indianapolis.
Yeah. So yeah, he was born to a wealthy family is the point. And he was the youngest of three children, so the middle child was his sister Alice, and then the oldest was his brother Bernard. Mm-hmm. And their childhood was like pretty chill for a while. They had a housekeeper and cook who essentially raised Kurt, and he credited her with like giving him, quote, decent moral instruction, and was exceedingly nice to me, was a great influence on me as anybody. And he said she was humane and wise, and the compassionate, forgiving aspects of his beliefs came from her. Like, he really loved this woman. And I don't really know, but it seems like he was much closer to her and his siblings than he ever was to his parents. They were, classic rich parents, which I think is interesting because I feel like that somewhat reflects the parents of Wilbur and Eliza.
Yeah.
In Slapstick. Like, they are just these rich people, well known, but not particularly like nurturing to their children.
Yeah, supporting of their children, but not caring for their children.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting because it seems like for a while, at least in the first decade of his life with the staff and his siblings, he was living on a paradise similar to Wilbur and Eliza. But then, dun dun dun. Well, so he also, this is important to note just because it's kind of interesting. He comes from a German-American family that spanned back, which you might have gotten from Vonnegut, but spans back generations in Indianapolis. So his family originally came to the U.S. as German immigrants in the mid-1800s, and they all spoke German and English, and as he notes in the prologue, were all religious skeptics. And as a child, it seemed like, he'd always have extended family in Indianapolis, but he talks about this in the prologue as well. After the First World War, there was a lot of, like, anti-German sentiment in Indianapolis, and thus, in order to be, like, or not in Indianapolis, in the U.S., but including
It wasn't just in Indianapolis. It branched out.
He branched out. And so, like, in order to really be accepted into U.S. society and be considered patriotic and be American, you had to kind of do away with a lot of your culture. And this isn't just Germans. This kind of happened for a lot of European immigrants who, over time, distanced themselves from their country's culture that they immigrated from and became integrated into American society.
Yeah, newsflash, America always been a little racist.
Yeah.
In case somebody hasn't told you yet.
We're here to let you know. And so by the time he was born, their German heritage was not super prevalent in his life. Like, he wasn't taught to speak German, whereas his parents, I think, and his grandparents for sure did.
Mm-hmm.
And so he always felt a little, like, weird about that. Like, he felt distanced from something that should have been important to him and should have been important to his family, but he didn't feel any connection to it, really.
Yeah.
Which was confusing. And also, so, you know, World War I, let's keep that in mind. That had happened before he was born, but still was having lasting effects on his family. And then about a decade-ish into his childhood, the Great Depression hit. And the family basically lost everything. So his father lost his architecture business. He had to sell their family home. Kurt was taken out of private school and sent to public school. Poor guy. And his mother's family fortune had already begun to decline because during Prohibition era, their brewery was shut down.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so they're kind of struggling, and his parents' response to all of this hardship was not great. His father became very depressed and, in quotation marks from the writer of this article I was reading, gave up on life. And I think what that means, as I read in other places, essentially just lacked ambition to ever do anything else of substance. He didn't try to make more money, didn't try to regain their wealth. Vonnegut described him as a dreamy artist after that.
I can understand that. Architecture is such a artistic field, and I feel like if you are someone who, at least at that day and time, were able to make a career from your art, I think it would be really, really, a successful career from your art. I think it would be tough to reckon with a reality in which you're no longer going to be able to do that, in which you have to do something that is compromising to your artistic integrity. And I don't know, I feel like particularly if you were already wealthy, it would be easy to see anything that wasn't related to the arts as beneath you.
Yeah, but because of this, and also because of the loss of wealth, his mother became very hateful and abusive, and specifically hateful towards his father. She was just I hate this man, I want to be rich. And she also became addicted to prescription pills and alcohol.
Yeah.
And that was an addiction that spanned until her death in 1944, when she eventually overdosed on sleeping pills in what was thought to be a suicide. So, and that's much later. At this point, we're still in the 30s, and so it took about a decade for her addiction to kill her. But yeah, so he was never really close to his parents, honestly, and he was close to his siblings, and we'll get there. But it's, he loses his culture, he loses his family life. A once haven paradise becomes loneliness, lack of family, similar to what happens to Wilbur in the book. So, because there wasn't any specific tie to Indianapolis, he and all his siblings eventually left and didn't stay there like their ancestors had. Most of their family had stayed in the area, but he never did. And it talks about that in the prologue, and he says they became a part of the interchangeable American machine. And on page 8 of the prologue, it says, and Indianapolis also did that, it says, Indianapolis, which had once had a way of speaking English all its own, and jokes and legends and poets and villains and heroes all its own, and galleries for its own artists, and had itself become an interchangeable part of the American machine. It was just another someplace where automobiles lived with a symphony orchestra and all, and a racetrack. Hi-ho. So this is kind of like a hint of his feelings about capitalism and American society, which is the butt of the joke throughout this book, especially American society, but also capitalism. And also is just key to like his feelings about his political beliefs and capitalism, and he hates it. He, spoiler, is a socialist, or was a socialist.
Who'da thunk?
So, which if you read any of his books, that's like kind of clear, but still. Yeah. So anyways, little backtrack, in high school, he became editor of the school newspaper, which is where he first learned that he could write, and also that he could write well. He was better at it than most of the people there, if not better than everyone. I don't know, really, but he was pretty good at it.
He's like one of several authors that we've had that were involved with their school newspaper. Man, R.I.P. the school newspaper. R.I.P. local journalism in general, but the school newspaper, that's a dying art if it's not already dead.
I didn't have a school newspaper in high school.
No.
Did you? No? Yeah.
We tried to bring our school newspaper back, and we made like 2 issues of it, and then all of us graduated, so it's gone now. Yeah. So he learned he could write. He went on to go to Cornell University for college in 1940, and his father was like, don't do something that won't make you any money and become like me. Do something else. Don't do arts. And so he majored in biochemistry, but he sucked at it and hated it. Fair enough, it's hard.
Yeah. But also he started writing for the Cornell Daily Sun, which is the Cornell newspaper, and no surprise, he was very good at it. He became the editor of the paper eventually, and he also wrote a joke satirical column, which is so him like dipping his toes into the writing style that he really loves. And leading up to World War II, actually, he wrote a satirical piece arguing pacifism and against U.S. involvement in the war. He was also a pacifist, and that kind of got him in trouble. But it's not...
I could imagine.
Yeah. He had to leave college in 1943 to go fight in World War II. And war is a very important part of his life story, but I'm going to skip that because I'm going to save that for other books or for whichever person is leading that, I think we should talk about.
Yeah, that's more relevant for Slaughterhouse 5.
Yeah. So, war, we'll come back to it in the future, but he did go fight in the war. He did end up going to the University of Chicago for like an graduate program, so he did finish school, but that was after the war. So after the war, he married Jane Cox, his high school sweetheart. Lightly sweetheart, that's just like a descriptive term that you use to describe someone that you date in high school. And he'd known her since kindergarten, actually, so she was also from Indianapolis. And they had 3 children. And he, as they started to have more and more children, he took an advertising job at General Electric to support his family. And also began writing short fiction on the side. It's interesting, I kind of want to point out that he became a writer, as we know, and his brother became a scientist. And in the prologue, he says he's a brother to writers everywhere, and Bernard is a brother to scientists everywhere. So that's their artificial extended family, which is a fun thing to think. And it's kind of true. You know, anytime I meet a journalist, we have a lot to talk about, and I'm sure anytime you meet someone who does tree work and works in forests and things like that, forestry.
Yeah, definitely. There's an inherent level of solidarity with everybody that is a federal worker.
Or that in general, yeah. So he published his first novel, Player Piano, in 1952, and it did moderately well. But he kind of struggled as a writer in general until the publication of Slaughterhouse 5, which was, widely successful. And that was stressful because he had a family to feed.
Yeah.
And so he continued to work at General Electric until, I believe, the publication of Slaughterhouse-5. But before that, he had developed like a cult following of like intellectuals, like college students and such, which is interesting. Like, so there were people who were really enjoying his work, but it took a bit for it to really take off. But by the early 1970s, like, he was one of the most famous writers because of Slaughterhouse-5. So during that time, between 1952 and 1970, in 1957, his sister Alice died of cancer. And he talks about that pretty extensively in the prologue. And I'm going to read some of it because I think it explains a lot of things about the way he viewed tragedy. I don't know. So she was dying. She had cancer. And one time when she and her and Kurt and Bernard, their other sibling, were discussing her impending death, she said soap opera because she'd be leaving 4 boys behind her. She had 4 kids and they wouldn't have a mother. And then she said slapstick, according to Kurt, which is kind of the absurdity, the unpredictability of life. Like, it's absurd that you have to die and leave kids behind when only one parent. But it gets worse. So she did die, as I already mentioned.
At a young age, right?
At a young age, yeah.
Well, relatively young.
Yeah, 41. So she spent the last day of her life in a hospital. The doctors and nurses said she could smoke and drink as much as she pleased and eat whatever she pleased. She coughed, she laughed, she made a couple of jokes, which I don't remember now. Then she sent us away. Don't look back, she said. So we did it. She died about the same time of the day that Uncle Alex died, an hour or 2 after the sun went down. And Uncle Alex is another person that Vonnegut talks about a lot. It's an uncle that he really liked and who was also an alcoholic, but founded a chapter of AA. But it says, and this is the slapstick of it all from the prologue, and hers would have been an unremarkable death statistically if it were not for one detail, which was this: her healthy husband, James Carmalt Adams, the editor of a trade journal for purchasing agents, which he put together on a cubicle on Wall Street, had died 2 mornings before on the broker's special, the only train in American railroading history to hurl itself off an open drawbridge. Think of that. So within 2 days, his sister dies and his brother-in-law dies. So Kurt and Jane took in 3 of her children. So now his family of 5 turns to a family of 8.
Yeah.
And he needs to make even more money. And so, in this time, that's before the publication of Slaughterhouse-5. And so that's why he keeps working at General Electric to bring in the paycheck. But he really wants to write books, and so he's really like struggling and trying to like write a book that becomes successful enough to make them money. And this like tragedy in his life, I think, is a big inspiration for this book. He says in the prologue that his sister is who he writes for. Yeah. He says something really beautiful. It's any creation which has the wholeness and harmoniousness, I suspect, was made by an artist or inventor with an audience of one in mind. And so she was his audience. And so when she dies, he loses his audience, technically. And it's kind of like Wilbur and Eliza. They were best friends. They were so close. And then when they became separated, they were Betty and Bobby Brown. And so he, in a sense, becomes like Bobby Brown. Like, he becomes a different person without his sister. And I think, like, it was a tragedy, but also he, like, makes jokes about it because that's just how life feels to him, So, yeah. Then we move into the publication of Slaughterhouse-Five, he does well, but then his children eventually grow up, they leave home, and his marriage falls apart. He was never very good at marriage, he says. He was never particularly good at interpersonal relationships other than that with his siblings. And similar to in Slapstick.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, he has a relationship with his children, but it's not a particularly, like, nurturing one in the way that you might think a father and child might have.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he divorces his wife, and there's like a lot of reasons that they divorce, but one big one is that she eventually became a Christian, and she was like a very devout Christian, which he was an atheist. And
yeah, if you can't tell from the book.
So after 5 of their 6 children had left home, he says they were forced to find other sorts of seemingly important work to do, and they just like fought about their differing beliefs. And he said the disagreements were painful, and the split was a terrible, unavoidable accident that we were ill-equipped to understand. And so they did remain friends after their divorce, but it still was like a difficult time for him, and he moved from their Cape Cod home where they lived to New York alone. And he became like kind of depressed, and he suffered from writer's block, and he just wasn't doing super well. And also, that was 1971, and in 1972, his son Mark suffered from like a mental breakdown because of his bipolar disorder, which was really, I don't know, it was a really, I didn't read a ton about it, it just like really impacted him. And Mark eventually was okay, and he later recovered and like wrote a book about the experience, but his family's kind of falling apart, he becomes depressed, and he ends up taking Ritalin kind of chronically. And I don't really know, I can't really tell if he was like abusing Ritalin or just like taking it.
Yeah.
To deal with his depression and his like maybe writer's block, trying to focus and be able to do things. But he just like goes through a period in the like early 1970s where he's really struggling. And so this is really another theme in this book, like the loneliness and failed marriage and disintegration of family. This really inspires Slapstick, this time period in his life. And then in the mid-1970s, he does start seeing a psychologist, and he starts getting better, and he eventually remarries. He remarries a... Well, I didn't even write down her name because it's like not... what is it? 1979. Yeah, he remarries a photographer, Jill Crimmins. They had been in a relationship for a while, and then they got married. And he was married to her until his death in 2007. And then, yeah, he does start doing better in the 1980s. He starts writing again, and he writes these like social realist novels. Jailbird, Dead-Eye Dick, Bluebeard. And so he recovers from this time, but this book was like the direct result, essentially, of that period of depression. So, yeah. And then in the 1980s and 1990s, he becomes like very political, and he's speaking out. I mean, he's been political. He's always been political, but he speaks out about constitutional freedom and like pacifism, nuclear control, like no nuclear warfare. He speaks out about climate change and like, well, global warming is what it was being called at the time, but he really just becomes vocally an activist, and he was very against the militarization of the U.S., especially after 9/11. He was like, that's a tragedy, but also we don't have to become so intensely military driven as a country.
You heard it here first, folks. Kurt Vonnegut says, fuck ICE.
Yeah. And I think the big points of his political views is that he was a pacifist, he was a socialist, he was a humanist, he was anti-capitalist, anti-racism. He was a far lefter. He kind of hated how people considered socialism evil.
Mm-hmm.
He made this comment that was like, socialism is no more an evil word than Christianity. And he's like, they both prescribe a society dedicated to the proposition that all men, women, and children are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
In Christianity, its truest form, at least. And so I think that, like, that social consciousness and, like, disillusionment with American society is pervasive throughout this book and also just his books.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, writing from the left, and as satire often is, the motivation of some of his books were political, but this one is kind of more of a, like, deeply personal journey as well. Like, there is political commentary throughout, but there is also the big themes of loneliness and depression and struggling with interpersonal relationships, and in response to that, though, laughing it off because of the grotesque situational poetry of life, the unpredictability of life.
Yeah, this one is definitely political in the sense that it is describing his life, and he understands that his life is what it is, at least partially due to political reasons.
Uh-huh. And I think he's also, this is my own opinion, but self-aware. I think,
yeah.
You know, we're not really meant, I'm getting a little into analysis here, but we're not really meant to like Wilbur, the main character, and I think that he is quick to point out that, like, his faults, his flaws, and he's trying to comment on, like, yeah, I know I was a bad husband. Yeah, I know that I let my views get the best of me. And I totally see how, like, arguing about Christianity and atheism could cause a relationship to fall apart, but...
Yeah. I mean, it is, at least for half of the people in that argument, literally a matter of life and death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think those are the big things in his life that really relate to this book. And like I said, he did pass away in 2007. He fell on the steps of his New York brownstone, and that's kind of what resulted in his death. And he was, I think he was 84. 84. This was in April. So, yeah, so he's 84. So, I mean, he lived a decently long life. And something that is interesting in this book is also, like, you know, he's an atheist, so afterlife is not something he's super concerned with. But I think this book makes a bit of a joke of afterlife, and so, and death. And, yeah, I don't think he was particularly concerned about dying.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's Kurt Vonnegut for now. There's a lot more that I didn't tell, but those are the big things that I thought we should discuss today.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. A lot of that lines up with the book, or at the very least you could see how you could take that life and aggrandize it into the book.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed learning about him. I would say that he has been, I've only done 2 authors, but I liked learning about him more than I liked learning about Aldous Huxley. No offense to Huxley. He just seemed kind of like an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no cute photos of Aldous Huxley in front of hydrangeas with a demure little Dwight D. Eisenhower pose.
I'm thinking that might not be in front of Cape Cod, actually. But I'm like, where is it? Because it's not in a New York City brownstone. I don't know. I need to find out where this photo is. But maybe I'll post this. I'm gonna post this photo on social media, guys, so everyone can see it. So if
Awesome.
you've listened to this episode, head to our social media, which I'll tell you about in just a second. Actually, I'll do it now. This is a nice segue. Well, no, because we have to play our game. Yeah, I'll do it later. Tease. You get to, if you stay till the end, I'll tell you about where to find the cute photo of Kurt Vonnegut. So, yeah, I wanted to play a game that we have played in, I think, every series in the past, which is Have They Read It? This one's a little hard because this book, as I mentioned, was not critically acclaimed. People were haters. So, I don't know if people have read it, but we can still try.
Sounds great.
So let me think of Logic, the rapper.
Okay.
The one who did the Suicide Hotline song.
I'm very well aware of who Logic is. What makes you think of Logic?
Suicide Hotline. Loneliness.
Fair enough. I don't think Logic has read this book.
Huh.
I think that Logic does read. In fact, I'm almost certain that he does, because I know he wrote at least one book. He might have written 2 at this point. But this just doesn't feel like something that he would have an interest in. Like, I don't know if he would read satire. I don't know if he would read humor novels. And if he did, I don't think this would be the one that he would go for.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with no. And I don't know if he would enjoy it if he did. So I'm thinking about this book and the way in which it talks about loneliness and the dissolution of the nuclear family and stuff like that. And somebody who was very concerned about the dissolution of the nuclear family was Margaret Thatcher.
Huh.
Do you think Margaret Thatcher ever read Slapstick?
No. I mean, I also don't know how... I know that Kurt Vonnegut is probably well-known worldwide, I think.
Yeah.
But, like, how popular was he in the UK, especially at, like, the time that, like, this book was being published? Like, I don't really know. I mean, maybe Slaughterhouse-Five had already been published, so maybe he was quite popular. I'm not sure. But, I mean, his books do really focus on, like, American themes, for sure. I mean, it does touch on, like, world politics and war and things like that in other books, but I don't know. But it's also, like, Western society, not just American. So I'm feeling like maybe she wouldn't have. But also I think that she was, like, conservative. So... Oh,
very much so.
I don't think she would
Incredibly
be
so.
Yeah. I don't think she would be into this book, honestly. She'd probably start reading it, and it would get to the incest, and she would be like... This is preposterous. Let's see. I was trying to think of politicians who have cited Kurt Vonnegut books, but also, like, no one cited this book as far as I know. Do you think Richard Nixon, who gets a mention in this book, ever read Slapstick?
I'm also gonna say no. It just feels like a book that did not branch very far outside of Vonnegut fans. Like, I feel like in order to have read Slapstick, the majority of people read Slaughterhouse-Five or one of his other popular books and liked it enough that they made the choice to read more by him. Like, it feels uncommon for Slapstick to have been a first pick for a Vonnegut book. And that being said, I don't know if Richard Nixon would have read Slaughterhouse-Five and then said, yeah, I need some more of this in my life.
Wait, before you go with yours, there's this guy I went to graduate school with. Sorry that I'm going to name drop you. We're not even like friends really. But he has a Kurt Vonnegut tattoo. And I remember like the day I met him, I commented on it. I was like, oh, is that a Kurt Vonnegut tattoo? And he was like, yeah. And we talked about Vonnegut. I can't remember what books we talked about, but I would like to know, Eli, if you've read Slapstick. So if you ever stumble across this podcast, can you let me know if that's one of the books you read? He was a lovely person, very nice. Anyways, go ahead.
Nice, hell yeah. Let me think, because I want to try to think of somebody where it feels like a possibility that they've read it. Okay, Kurt Vonnegut was a humorist. He wrote things that were intended to be funny, and obviously had an admiration for historical comedians and stuff. And so I'm thinking of modern, or not necessarily modern, but more contemporary humorists. Do you think creator of Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson, has read Slapstick?
I don't know anything else about Bill Watterson, but I don't know. Without knowing anything about him other than Calvin and Hobbes, I would say maybe, but I don't know that if he's a reader or not. Like, I mean, I do think that comics can be really clever and can be really intelligent. Like, they don't have all...
Particularly Calvin and Hobbes. It
Yeah.
has, like, it deals with some very deep issues in some of its runs that I think that a lot of people forget about. Like, if you only know a couple of the panels, you probably don't know the ones where it's talking about the devastation that a family experiences after having their house broken into and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could see him having read it. I don't know how much of a reader he is, but has he ever done anything besides, like, comic illustration and writing? Did he ever do any other, like, authorship?
I know he's done illustrations for a book recently. He worked for a couple of newspapers and then worked for a advertising agency. He was a freelance artist until Calvin and Hobbes. And then after Calvin and Hobbes, he hasn't done a tremendous amount. Like, he was successful from that and then just kind of disappeared until recently. Like I said, I know that he did illustrations for a new book that came out not too long ago.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I could see that being the thing he might read. I do struggle with this book just because I think it's probably, like I said in last week's episode, I couldn't find it in a single bookstore, so it's probably one of his least read books, I would guess. But, yeah. But I love it. Just take that, world.
Yeah, it only has... It has less than 45,000 ratings on Goodreads, which for a book by an author as well known as Kurt Vonnegut is pretty low.
Yeah. Well, if we instead, let's compare it to his most well-known book. Slaughterhouse-Five has 1.4 million ratings on Goodreads. So, and even like Cat's Cradle, over 400,000. Sirens of Titan, Mother Night, like, let me see if it has the least amount of ratings.
I would assume maybe something like Dead-Eyed Dick or Bluebeard.
Yeah, Bluebeard has like slightly less, but only it has 43,313, whereas Slapstick is 43,700. Oh, Timequake.
Oh yeah,
That one.
I didn't love that one.
Dead-Eye Dick has 30,000. Oh, Jailbird, that one, 25,000. Okay, so his most recent books have the least amount of ratings, but still.
Yeah.
Slapstick's definitely under 100,000, whereas more of his books are over that. But anyways, okay, so that's episode 2. Join us next week for our last episode in our series on Slapstick, where we will be doing an analysis and talking about the themes of the book and how those themes do or do not relate to the world we live in today. And if you're interested, if this is like your first series on the podcast, I meant to do this last week and I forgot, but we have covered 3 books besides this thus far. Those are 1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451. So if you're into those books, yeah, go back and listen to our previous episodes. I mean, if you've made it this far, then you have probably seen our page on whatever platform you listen to podcasts, so you might already know that. But in case you didn't, go listen to those episodes if you want. Do you want to tell us about our intro and outro, Samuel?
Yeah, our intro and outro are a remix of the song 48 by Kulla.
Yeah. And if you want to follow us on social media and see that really cute picture of Kurt Vonnegut, you can find us on Instagram at the Satire Fire Pod, Pod, or on Blue Sky, TikTok, and YouTube at the Satire Fire. Also, all of our, I haven't really mentioned this before, but all of our episodes can be found on YouTube for free. So if you don't have a streaming platform or somewhere that you like listen to podcasts regularly, but you still want to listen, you can go to YouTube. No need to pay for Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever if you don't already have it. So yeah, I think that about does it. Reach out if you have any thoughts, questions, suggestions, criticisms, jokes, goofs, bits, games. Let us know in our DMs or in our comments. And thank you so much for being here today and listening. I'm Sydney.
And I'm Samuel.
And this is the Satire Fire. Bye.
Bye.
I just about come to the end of the road. Here, I've just about lost patience with you people. You get your ass out into the mountains or someplace or hide in there and watch that damn tube. But if not, fuck it. I'm done. In fact, my sermon